Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Jason Miller never asked for trouble. All he wanted was peace, 10 acres of land, and the freedom to do as he pleased. But when a power-hungry HOA tried to claim his property, they made one fatal mistake. They thought he'd surrender. Now it's war. And Jason, he's more than ready to fight back. The morning air was crisp as Jason Miller stepped out onto the porch of his 10-acre ranch, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and his ever-present revolver holstered at his hip. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, casting a golden glow over the rolling fields that separated him from the newly developed suburban neighborhood on the other side of the hill. He took a deep breath, savoring the scent of fresh earth and open space. His space. This land was his pride, his sanctuary. He had spent years building his home, a solid, practical house with a private shooting range in the back and a large American flag waving proudly at the entrance. After a decade of military service, all he wanted was peace, freedom, and the right to do as he damn well pleased on his own property. That peace was short-lived. The first sign of trouble arrived in a neatly folded envelope, slipped into his mailbox with the precision of someone who believed paperwork held real power. Jason opened it lazily, expecting the usual junk mail, but his eyes narrowed the moment he saw the letterhead, Maple Hills Homeowners Association. He didn't remember signing up for any HOA, and as far as he was concerned, they had no say over his land. The contents of the letter, however, suggested otherwise. It was a formal notice of violations, outlining several infractions Jason was supposedly guilty of. Unauthorized structure. His private shooting range was deemed a public safety concern. Non-approved color scheme. His house did not comply with the HOA's designated aesthetic. Flagpole restrictions. His 20-foot flagpole was in violation of community height limitations. Mandatory membership and fees. A demand for immediate compliance with HOA bylaws, including monthly dues. Jason let out a slow breath, forcing himself to remain calm. The Maple Hills HOA was the governing body of the suburban development that had popped up a few years ago, a cookie-cutter neighborhood filled with pristine lawns, beige houses, and people who valued conformity above all else. He had never cared about them, assuming they'd keep to their side of the hill while he kept to his. But apparently, that wasn't enough for them. Tossing the letter onto the kitchen counter, Jason did a quick check of his land records. Just as he thought, his property had never been part of the HOA. He owned every square inch of it free and clear, with no legal obligation to follow their absurd rules. The next day, he decided to ignore the letter. If they wanted to fight, they'd have to come to him. And they did. It started with an unexpected visit. Jason was working in his garage, tinkering with his truck, when a sleek black SUV pulled up outside his gate. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Richard Gates, the HOA president. The man was in his early 50s, with thinning gray hair and the kind of bloated arrogance that came from too many years of ordering people around. He was flanked by Karen Bloom, the HOA's self-proclaimed enforcer, a woman with a pinched face and an expression of perpetual disapproval. Jason didn't bother walking to them. He simply wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the doorframe, waiting. "Mr. Miller," Richard called out, adjusting the expensive watch on his wrist. "We need to have a conversation." Jason took a slow sip of his coffee, deliberately not moving. "Do we?" Karen stepped forward, clutching a clipboard as if it were a weapon. "We've sent you a formal notice regarding your violations." "Yeah, saw that." Jason motioned vaguely toward his house. "It's on my counter, made for great reading." Richard's face twitched. "You're required to comply with Maple Hills HOA regulations. It's in the best interest of the community." Jason let out a short laugh. "That's so. Funny thing, I don't live in your community." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Your land falls within our zoning jurisdiction." "No," Jason said flatly, stepping forward. "My land is independent. Always has been. I checked. You're not my HOA. I don't owe you a damn thing." Richard gave him a rehearsed smile, the kind of corporate smirk used on people who didn't know better. "That's where you're mistaken. Our records indicate—" Jason cut him off. "Your records are wrong." Karen's nostrils flared. "We're simply asking for cooperation. A few changes to bring your property in line with community standards." Jason folded his arms. "Let me stop you right there. I'm not painting my house beige. I'm not taking down my flag, and I'm sure as hell not paying you a cent." So why don't you two turn around, drive back to your little subdivision, and forget my address?" There was a long, tense silence. Then Richard's smile faded. "That would be unfortunate." Jason hated veiled threats. His military instincts kicked in, his body going still. "Unfortunate how?" Richard adjusted his cuffs. "Failure to comply will result in fines. If necessary, legal action. I strongly advise you to reconsider." Jason held his gaze for a long moment, then took another sip of coffee, utterly unbothered. "Sue me." Karen scoffed, clearly not used to defiance. Richard, however, seemed to sense that pushing further right now would be a mistake. Without another word, he nodded to Karen, and they both turned and walked back to their SUV. Jason watched them go, his jaw tightening. This wasn't over. He knew their type. They weren't used to being told no, and they were about to learn just how hard he could push back. The next few days were quiet, but Jason knew better than to believe that Richard and his HOA cronies had given up. People like them didn't take no for an answer. They saw defiance as an open challenge, and Jason had all but invited them to try something stupid. And stupid came knocking sooner than expected. It was early afternoon when he noticed a small group of people gathered near the entrance of his property. Jason set down his wrench and wiped his hands, stepping onto his porch to get a better look. Standing just beyond the fence were Richard, Karen, and 3 other HOA members, clipboard warriors who looked like they had never done a day of real work in their lives. They were taking pictures of his land, whispering to each other, writing things down. Jason's patience was already wearing thin. He walked to the gate, arms crossed. "Y'all lost." Karen, ever the fearless enforcer, was the first to speak. "We're conducting a formal inspection." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Inspection of what, exactly?" Richard stepped forward, his smug confidence in full display. "Your violations. We're documenting them for official processing. You'll be receiving a second notice, along with the appropriate fines." Jason chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't seem to understand how private property works." Karen's mouth twisted into something between a sneer and a smirk. "You'll find that the law is on our side, Mr. Miller." Jason exhaled through his nose, staring them down. Then, without breaking eye contact, he turned around, unzipped his jeans, and pretended to take a long, exaggerated piss onto his own lawn. Karen gasped in horror. One of the clipboard warriors made a strangled noise of disgust. Richard's face turned red with fury. Jason zipped up and turned back around, grinning. "Now that's my official response to your inspection." "You think this is funny?" Richard hissed, stepping closer to the gate. "Oh, I know it's funny." Jason leaned against the fence. "Here's the thing, Dick. You can take all the pictures you want, but you have zero legal power over me. So unless you're planning to jump this fence, get off my land." Karen's face was bright red. "You're making a huge mistake." Jason just smiled. "Wouldn't be my first." The group stormed off, Karen muttering something about escalating the situation. Jason had no doubt that this was only the beginning, and he was ready for the next round. The HOA didn't take their humiliation lightly. Jason had expected retaliation, but even he was surprised by just how petty and relentless they could be. Within days, they launched a full-scale harassment campaign, each move more underhanded than the last. It started small. A cop car pulled up to Jason's gate early one morning. The officer, a young guy in his late 20s, looked more embarrassed than anything as he stepped out of his cruiser. Jason, sipping his morning coffee on the porch, didn't even bother moving. "Let me guess," Jason called out. "Noise complaint." The cop gave him an apologetic nod. "Yeah, multiple reports of reckless firearm use." Jason smirked, took a long sip, and pointed toward the shooting range sign, clearly visible from where they stood. "Private property, designated range, everything's legal." The officer sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I figured. Just had to check." Jason didn't hold it against the guy. He wasn't the enemy, but he damn well knew who was. That same day, another problem cropped up. Jason went to check his internet connection, only to find that his cables had been cut. Not chewed by animals, cleanly severed. He knew exactly who was behind it. Instead of raging, he got to work. Jason drove straight into town and bought a full surveillance system, high-quality motion-activated cameras with night vision, wide coverage, and cloud storage. If the HOA wanted to play dirty, he'd make damn sure to catch them in the act. And then came the HOA fines. Jason found a thick envelope in his mailbox, stuffed with printouts of bogus violations. Failure to maintain uniform aesthetic, $500. Unauthorized flagpole height, $200 per week until removed. Excessive noise pollution, $300. Illegal operation of a commercial firearm facility, $1,000. At the bottom, in bold, was the final demand. Total owed, $2,000. Immediate payment required. Jason nearly burst out laughing. That night, he sat at his desk, carefully taping the entire stack together until he had a long, scroll-like monstrosity. The next morning, he walked right up to the HOA office, dropped the entire taped-up mess on the receptionist's desk, and said, "You forgot to print it on toilet paper." The receptionist's jaw dropped, but Jason was already walking out the door. His point was clear. He wasn't playing their game. But the HOA wasn't finished. They were just getting started. A week passed without any new stunts from the HOA, and Jason almost thought they might have finally learned their lesson. But deep down, he knew better. People like Richard and Karen didn't just give up. No, they were regrouping, scheming, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. And then, one morning, Jason woke up to the sound of power tools. He rolled out of bed, threw on a pair of jeans, and stepped outside, expecting to see one of his motion cameras picking up a stray animal. Instead, he saw a group of construction workers standing by his shooting range, tearing down his equipment. Jason froze for half a second, trying to process what the hell he was looking at. Then the rage hit him like a freight train. He marched across the field, fists clenched, voice sharp as a knife. "Hey, the hell do you think you're doing?" The workers startled, turning to face him. One of them, a burly guy in an orange vest, lowered his drill and cleared his throat. We were told this was an unpermitted structure that needed to be removed." Jason's nostrils flared. "Told by who?" The man glanced toward the road. Jason followed his gaze, and there they were. Richard, Karen, and 2 HOA board members standing by their SUV, watching like smug generals surveying a battlefield. Jason felt something snap inside him. He stormed past the workers and made a beeline for Richard. The HOA president barely had time to react before Jason was in his face, voice low and dangerous. "You ordered this?" Richard, ever the politician, gave a calm smile. "Mr. Miller, your so-called shooting range violates numerous safety and zoning regulations. The HOA has the authority to—" Jason grabbed him by the collar. Every single person stopped breathing. "Get off my land," Jason growled, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with so much rage that even Karen paled. Richard's confidence wavered, but he tried to recover, forcing a chuckle. "You lay a hand on me, and I'll have you arrested, Miller." Jason leaned in closer. "Buddy, you already broke the law by trespassing. That means, legally, I can have your ass arrested right now. Want to call the cops and find out?" Richard swallowed. Karen clutched her clipboard like it was a Bible. Jason let go, shoving him back. "Now get these workers the hell out of here." The burly guy in the vest, who had zero interest in being part of this mess, waved to his team. "All right, boys, pack it up." Jason waited as the workers loaded up their tools and drove away. Only then did he turn back to the HOA crew, eyes burning. "This is your final warning," he said coldly. "Next time you come onto my land uninvited, I won't be this nice." Richard straightened his tie, forcing an unconvincing smirk. "This isn't over." Jason's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Oh, I'm counting on it." As the HOA members retreated, Jason turned and pointed up at one of his newly installed cameras. He had it all on tape, and this time, he was going to use it. Jason had always considered himself a patient man. He had been through war zones, survived ambushes, and faced down men far more dangerous than some bureaucratic HOA clowns. But this was something else entirely. They had trespassed. They had vandalized his property. They had tried to steal what was his. And the worst part, they weren't afraid. That smug son of a bitch Richard still walked around like he owned everything he laid eyes on, like Jason was some disobedient child who just needed to be shown his place. Karen and the rest of her clipboard warriors acted as if the law itself bent to their will, as if rules were meant for everyone but them. It made Jason's blood boil. For years, he had kept to himself, never bothered anyone. All he wanted was his land, his privacy, his freedom. But people like Richard, they didn't understand men like Jason. They mistook silence for submission. They thought they could just take. That's why, When Jason heard the commotion outside his gate that evening, he was already tense, his instincts screaming at him that something was off. He stepped onto the porch, rifle slung over his shoulder. His heart was pounding, not with fear, but with something far worse, cold, controlled anger. A black SUV and 2 trucks were parked right at his gate, their headlights throwing long shadows over the dirt road. Standing just beyond the fence were Richard, Karen, and 3 so-called security officers, men wearing black HOA branded shirts, as if that made them something more than a bunch of wannabe enforcers. Jason's jaw tightened. This was different. This wasn't just another bullshit attempt to harass him. They had brought muscle. Richard was smirking again, but this time there was a gleam in his eyes, something predatory. Jason recognized that look. He'd seen it in the eyes of men who thought they had the upper hand. Jason hated that look. "Evening, Jason," Richard said smoothly, stepping forward. Jason didn't move. "Get to the point." Richard sighed, as if Jason was being unreasonable. "I was hoping we could settle this peacefully." Jason let out a humorless chuckle. "You don't do peaceful, Richard. You do backstabbing and paperwork." Karen bristled, but Richard held up a hand to stop her. "The board has made a decision. You are now officially part of Maple Hills HOA. The paperwork has been filed. Your first fine is due Monday morning." Jason felt something snap. He actually laughed, not out of amusement, but because the sheer audacity of these people was almost impressive. "So let me get this straight," Jason said, stepping down from the porch, boots crunching against the gravel. "You illegally claim my land, forge some documents, fine me for it, and then what? Expect me to write a check and say thank you?" Richard's smirk widened. "Well, it would be the smart thing to do." Jason exhaled slowly, and then, without another word, he fired 2 shots into the air. The thunderous crack of the rifle shattered the night, sending Karen into a screaming panic as she dropped her clipboard and dove to the ground. The security guys flinched, hands instinctively twitching toward their empty belts, because unlike Jason, they weren't actually armed. Richard, he didn't flinch. Instead, he laughed. Actually laughed. "That's cute, Miller," he said, stepping forward. "Trying to scare us? That's not how this works." Jason's grip tightened on the rifle. That was their problem, wasn't it? They still didn't believe him. They still thought he was just another pushover, some lone homeowner who would fold under the right amount of pressure. Jason took a slow, deliberate breath, steadied his aim, and fired a single shot. The bullet whistled past Richard's head, missing his ear by a hair's width before slamming into the wooden post behind him. The smug grin vanished from Richard's face. The night was dead silent. Karen, still lying flat on the ground, let out a shaky whimper. The security officers. They looked like they were about 2 seconds from pissing themselves. Jason lowered the rifle, but his eyes stayed locked on Richard. His voice, when he spoke, was deadly calm. "Next one won't miss." Richard didn't move. His face had gone pale, his confidence crumbling under the weight of what had just happened. He swallowed hard, tried to regain some of his composure, but Jason saw the fear, and he loved it. Karen finally managed to push herself up, still shaking. You psychopath! You almost killed him!" Jason turned his gaze on her, expression unreadable. "Almost." Richard's hands were shaking. He clenched his jaw, tried to mask it, but Jason saw it clear as day. "This isn't over," he muttered. Jason took a step forward, making him instinctively flinch. "Oh, I think it is," Jason said softly. "Now get. Office my land." No one argued this time. The security team bolted for their trucks, practically tripping over themselves to get inside. Karen, still fuming, scrambled into the passenger seat of the SUV. Richard was the last to leave, hesitating for half a second before finally getting into the car without another word. As they pulled away, Jason watched them go, his heart still pounding. He knew they wouldn't let this go. People like Richard never did, but for the first time, they had seen what they were really up against, and Jason hadn't even begun to make their lives hell. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, local homeowners, even a few police officers had shown up to watch Maple Hills HOA versus Jason Miller unfold. The case had drawn serious attention. After all, it wasn't every day that a homeowners association got dragged into court over attempted land theft, harassment, and outright forgery. Jason sat at the defense table looking completely at ease, arms crossed as he watched Richard Gates sweat bullets from across the room. The HOA president sat stiffly beside his attorney, a smug-looking man in an expensive suit who up until now had probably been convinced he could win this case. But Richard, he knew better. He knew they were walking into a buzzsaw. And that's exactly what happened. The trial opened with the prosecution's attempt to paint Jason as an unhinged gun nut who had recklessly fired at innocent HOA officials just trying to do their jobs. Mr. Miller, the HOA's lawyer, said, striding toward the witness stand, "Is it true that you fired a weapon at my client, Richard Gates, during an altercation on your property?" Jason leaned forward slightly, keeping his expression neutral. "I fired into the air first. Warning shots." The lawyer pounced. "So you admit you fired your weapon?" Jason cut him off. "To defend my land, yes. As permitted under the Castle Doctrine in the great state of Texas." A ripple went through the spectators. The judge leaned forward. "Are you saying you were within your legal rights, Mr. Miller?" Jason nodded. "Absolutely, Your Honor. I have video evidence of Maple Hills HOA trespassing, vandalizing my property, and trying to enforce rules that have nothing to do with me." The HOA lawyer hesitated. That wasn't part of their plan. Jason's own attorney, a sharp-witted woman named Melissa Carter, smiled as she stood. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit into evidence a series of video recordings taken from my client's security cameras, footage showing multiple instances of HOA harassment, including the night of the alleged attack." She handed a USB drive to the bailiff. A screen lowered in the courtroom, and the first video began to play. Jason watched as Richard visibly paled. The footage started with Karen cutting Jason's internet cables in the dead of night. Then a second video showed Richard leading HOA officials onto Jason's property, marking violations with spray paint. And then, the final nail in the coffin. The video of the night Richard had brought his so-called security team. The jury watched as Richard smugly declared Jason's land part of the HOA. Then came the gunshots. The camera perfectly captured Karen hitting the ground like a panicked possum, one of the HOA security guys nearly jumping into Richard's arms, and, of course, the single, precise shot that had whizzed right past Richard's ear. The jury was silent. Then, in the far back of the room, someone snorted. The sound was so unexpected that it set off a chain reaction. First one laugh, then another, and before anyone could stop it, the entire courtroom was cracking up. Even the judge had to clear his throat and adjust his glasses. Richard, face beet red, gritted his teeth. "This is a joke," he muttered under his breath. Jason, still relaxed, smirked at him from across the room. "Yeah, you are." When the laughter died down, Jason's attorney turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client did not attack anyone. He legally defended his property from illegal intrusion. But Mr. Gates and the HOA, they forged documents, tried to fine him for things they had no authority over, and engaged in a months-long campaign of harassment." She turned to the judge. "We move to dismiss all charges against Mr. Miller." The judge nodded without hesitation. "Charges dismissed." Jason exhaled slowly, not because he was surprised, but because it was finally over. But now came the real fun. His lawyer straightened her blazer. "Now, let's talk counterclaims. My client is suing the Maple Hills HOA for harassment, trespassing, property damage, and attempted fraud." Richard's lawyer immediately shot up. "Your Honor, this is outrageous." The judge held up a hand. "Mr. Gates, I've seen more than enough." He turned to the jury. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" A man in the front row, who had been chuckling through most of the footage, stood up. "We have, Your Honor. We find in favor of Jason Miller." Jason felt a rush of satisfaction as Richard slumped forward, eyes wide with pure horror. The judge continued. "The Maple Hills HOA is ordered to pay $250,000 in damages to Mr. Miller." A loud, choking sound came from Richard's throat. Karen, now looking positively sick, turned toward him. "Richard," she whispered, "we don't have that kind of money." Jason grinned. "That's a you problem." Richard shot up from his seat. "This is insanity." The judge slammed his gavel. "No, Mr. Gates, this is justice." Richard's shoulders sagged. His entire career, his power, his influence was gone. The HOA would never recover from this. Jason took his time standing up, enjoying every second of Richard's meltdown. He turned to Melissa and clapped a hand on her shoulder. "Drinks are on me." She smirked. "You just won $250,000, Jason. Drinks should be on everyone." As Jason walked out of the courthouse, free, victorious, and completely untouchable, he couldn't help but whistle. because for the first time in months, his land was truly his again, and no one would ever take that away from him. A month had passed since the trial, and Jason was exactly where he belonged, on his porch, a cold beer in hand, watching the sunset over his 10 untouched, beautiful acres of land. No more letters, no more fake fines, no more HOA goons sneaking around at night, thinking they had the right to tell him what to do with his own property. Peace, at last. And as for the Maple Hills HOA, gone. The lawsuit had financially gutted them. With $250,000 owed to Jason and additional legal fees piling up, the HOA had been forced to disband entirely. Homeowners in the subdivision, many of whom had never liked Richard's reign of terror to begin with, voted to dissolve the organization rather than keep paying into a system that had lost all power. Richard bankrupt, Karen disgraced, and Jason, well, he was doing just fine. He took another sip of beer, listening to the quiet, real quiet, not the forced HOA-mandated kind. Then, in the distance, he heard it, the familiar sputter of a dying car engine. Jason turned his head just in time to see Richard Gates' old rusted sedan struggling to make it down the dirt road. He smirked. Richard had lost his job, his cushy lifestyle, and his power trip. Rumor had it he had been forced to sell his fancy SUV, downgrade to a beat-up old car, and move in with his brother in another town. But before he left, he had one last job, packing up what was left of the HOA office before the building was sold off to cover legal debts. As Richard's car coughed and finally died right in front of Jason's property, there was a long pause. Then, with all the dignity of a beaten man, Richard slammed his forehead against the steering wheel. Jason grinned. It was the perfect ending.